gentleman tonight, his name is Marc Haberkorn. You can find him at Twitter at Marc Haberkorn. And again, he is a program director at IBM. Very privileged to have him here tonight. Also want to mention, we're just shy, the graphic actually is old. We just hit 495 members as of this evening. Very thrilled to be averaging about 100 new members a month. That speaks to the group itself. You can't hear me? All right, I'll try and talk. All right, there we go. Thank you. So again, very privileged to say we're almost at 500 members. Very thrilled that we're averaging about 100 a month, and that speaks to the group itself and how many awesome, talented marketers and other specialties we have in this group. We're always looking for people that want to present. If you have an idea, come find me or Cole. If you're wanting, we'll be getting to something else where we have a new website. We're really thrilled that we'll be rolling this out this week. If I can get a little help from Patrick and a little more Cole time, we'll have this thing up and running live. But I'll show you guys later. If you want to look on your phones, dev.dchristopherdouglas.com at the moment. But at any rate, again, I want to give a shout out to our awesome sponsors, BP Studios, for always being here and filming the event. Also, Scott Evans Design, he's helped us do the logo. Maxit Media's working on a live video for us on and then our companies that let us have our time. iNet Process, we do marketing automation and CRM solutions. Coles, which does amazing websites. VE Design. Twitter handles are below. We'd love it if you follow them. Also, give a shout out to our host for the evening, Fox and Hound. They don't have to do this for free, but they do, and it's really cool that they do. There is a special tonight, so if you do buy food, they're going to give you 10% off, and then beers are $2.50. Please do take care of the waitresses. They do a really awesome job, help us move tables around, get everything set up ahead of time, and really want to make sure they get taken care of. Again, the food in the back, my company, iNet Process, Scott's company, and BP Studios have all bought food for you guys. So I want to give a shout out for that. Students, let me see your hand if you are in college or recently graduated. I got a couple in the room. This slide is really for you. Look up on Bitly, look at TMC students. Go ahead and fill that out. That helps me connect with you guys, and so that I can help you find internships and jobs. So far to date, I've helped 12 students get full-time employment, and 8 students have gotten internships. It's not hard. It's called networking, and you're not going to do it behind your phone. So the whole point of this, the third part where it says mentor in Triangle Marketing Club, where it's learn, network, and mentor, is to help you guys connect with hiring managers to get you jobs. Your parents will love us. All right. So without anything you want to address?
Yeah. For those on the Twitters, tonight's hashtag is TMC Tonight. We highly encourage you to tweet anything productive that you guys want tonight. Take pictures. Feel free to as well connect with the other people here that you see on their phones talking about tonight's event.
Alrighty, without further ado, I'm going to call Marc up. Again, do love the interaction on Twitter, so please feel free to give shout outs or memorable tweets or whatever you want to do. Without much more, Marc Haberkorn. Thanks. Put down your account. Yeah. Okay. While you get set up, let me.
You hear that?
And one last shout out: if you are wanting a beer or something to drink, hold your menu up. The waitresses will come to you and bring it to the table, so you don't have to go anywhere.
Can you hear me in the back? Is that loud enough? Okay. Thanks. So I'm Marc Haberkorn. I work at IBM in the product management space. I manage a team worldwide in a cloud management space. I'm going to take you through a little bit of a view of the product management experience and getting from an idea, conceptualization, to taking that to market, iterating on the roadmap to deliver that, and some of the considerations along the way and some tactics. Now, I recognize that there are many different disciplines in this arena from the previous conversations I've had with y'all. I think sales, marketing, product management, product marketing, all kinds of various different things. And as a result, I've tried to make this sort of a cross-cutting concern view of designing a product from the ground up that all of you will be able to take something from. So hopefully I achieve that, and we'll see if I actually am. But let me introduce myself first. So who am I? I am a sufferer of hobby ADHD. What do I mean by that? Well, I have a bunch of things: woodworking, aviation, Chris mentioned, pilot friends, fitness, ice hockey, hunting, singing a charity band, all kind of different stuff. I've also found the cure for that coming in October of this year. So we'll see how things end up after that process. I graduated from Penn State with a computer engineering degree, 2003, for those of you doing the math. I started off in development at IBM. From there, I moved over and got my MBA at Duke. Sorry for any Carolina fans in the house here. Any? One. All right, I'll face this way. All right, so I got my MBA from Duke in 2008 and moved over to product management, and I've been there ever since. I love it. And hopefully I can instill some of that love into you all. So that's what I do now, is product management. And I would also loosely define my role as sort of corporate entrepreneurship. I've had the privilege and the opportunity in IBM to create several new products from scratch, which in a big company like that, it's kind of rare to be able to get that opportunity. Some of that's just fortuitous. And so in 6 years of product management, I've done that twice. One of those products hit 20 million, and one of them hit 100 million in the first 2 years. It's beyond that now, but in case any of you are competitors, I can't give you the real number. But it is growing pretty quick, and we'll see how far it goes. So, given that this is a reciprocal relationship here, who are you all? Who in here is a marketing manager? Okay, about 6. Who of you are in sales? About 6. I'm seeing a trend here. How many of you are product managers? Let me guess, 6. Yeah, 3, all right. So the rest of you, what would you say you do? Marketing? Marketing manager, same thing. All right, marketing. Anything else? Any disciplines? This is so I can tailor the rest of my presentation. This is not an idle request. Sorry? Pruning. Tree pruning. Recruiting. All right, I got it. Anybody else? I think I scared them all away. All right. Healthcare. What area in healthcare? Senior living. Okay, cool. Advertising. So, okay, I'd lump that under marketing, but that's probably not an accurate thing for me to do. And one more? Resume writer. Awesome. Okay. So that gives me some context, so thank you for that. So what am I going to talk to you about today? The first thing is, if you're going to build a new product, you got to decide what to build. That's a pretty important decision. So we'll go through some of how you can do that and some tactics you can use to make that a little more, let's say, directed. Building and iterating on your product roadmap. So once you've chosen an idea, how do you decide, okay, on my idea, what do I do next? What are some of the ideas I want to tackle? What do I want to innovate on in this product set? Then go to market considerations. If the greatest product in the world is defined but no one can sell it, does it actually matter? Does it exist? So things like the pricing considerations, your go-to-market channel, your sales incentives, all these sorts of things are considerations we'll talk about. And then I'll give a little bit of my advice on what it takes to be a good product manager, in case any of you have aspirations. I know that in the industry, there's sort of an increase in, let's say, interest in product managers, and that's because people are realizing that with this whole entrepreneurship motion that's coming up, we all see all the venture capitalists making huge bets in Silicon Valley. We're seeing a huge movement as local as Durham in the startup space. There's this notion of being able to translate ideas into value. So hopefully I'm going to give you some ideas on how you can better do that. My advice is free. Maybe some water and some beer if I can negotiate a little while. And it's worth every penny, so you'll get what you pay for. That's my disclaimer up front. So let's say you're ready. So now what? The first step, as I said, is to identify what problem you want to solve as you're embarking on your product journey. So I want to make this interactive. You do not get to be lazy, so hopefully you haven't consumed too many beverages just yet, or maybe that would actually help, I don't know. In that case, social lubrication is optional. So why are these bad products? Any ideas? Somebody help me out. Do you think these are good products? Does anyone want to buy one of these? So just to clarify, this one on the left, that's a Control-Alt-Delete automated thingy do. So if you want to hit Control-Alt-Delete faster and easier, you can use this handy dandy doodad for $19.95 plus shipping and handling. So anyone have any ideas why this is a terrible product? And if any of you had designed this product, my apologies, but not really. So I guess I'll give you the answer. Neither of these problems, would you say, I should phrase this question, would you say either of these problems is something that you face on a day-to-day basis? Anyone in here? No, okay. How many of you have been on a picnic in your life? All of you, okay. So it is a pervasive problem that maybe on the picnic pants thing you've all experienced. How many of you would pay for this product despite having been to a picnic? 0, exactly. Similarly, all of you have had, if you've used an IBM computer running Windows, you've had to hit Control-Alt-Delete, right? How many of you would pay for this doodad? None of you. The reason is you need to solve problems that have 3 characteristics. They're shared by many people, that people will want to pay money to solve, and the most important one is they're urgent. So if you solve a problem that is shared by a lot of people, even if they want to spend money on it or could potentially be convinced to share money on it, spend money on it, and it's not an urgent problem, it'll continuously be put to the back burner and never be closed. So as you're looking at, from a marketing perspective, from a sales perspective, what does this mean for you? You want to be conveying the urgency of the products that your product managers are bringing to market. You want to make sure that people understand why this is something they need to buy today as opposed to next week or the next month. But from a product management perspective, you have to be absolutely sure that if you're going to be investing a significant amount of time and money and effort on a product, it's something that solves all 3 of these. So how do you identify these sorts of problems? It's important to listen. So you need to look and listen. And anytime you see any sort of pain, whether it's observing a user, using Windows in this case, look at when they grimace. There's lots of ways to get this kind of feedback, but the common thread is you need to be in the market. How many of you have product managers on your teams, if you're not product managers, that sit in their office all day, most of the day? How many of you have product managers on your teams? How many of you showered this week? Their hands do work. That section over there I would not want to be in, all right? So you can watch users and sort of see where they struggle. Another thing you can do is follow your users on Twitter, just as a tactic. I find that if I sign up my clients, I follow my clients on Twitter, I'm able to see when they reach out and talk about the things they're doing on a day-to-day basis, which is using my product in a lot of cases. I can glean some insights on what causes them pain, and that becomes an opportunity for me. Another thing is reading your users' blogs. There's a tremendous amount of insight out there for free if you know where to look. If you can look at people's blogs, you can understand, again, what's top of mind for them, which sometimes is a good thing, a positive thing. Sometimes it's pain. They're communicating that. Google for whatever it is sucks. I do that a lot. I Google for my product sucks. And unfortunately, sometimes I find a hit. Not too often, that's a good thing. But you'll find ways that you can improve on an existing product. Any other ideas on this? Yep. Listen to your help desk. Excellent idea. You can find out what the most common problems are. Support staff, help desk. Absolutely, great one. Ambulance chasers. That's what we call that. Anyone else? All right. Well, thanks for the input there. Empathy. This is the main thing. You need to be empathic. You need to understand and sort of build up an intuitive sense for what it is that your clients need. You have to get this idea in your head where you just intuitively understand, without asking questions, what it is that they would do, what they would say about a given question if they were posed it. Peter Drucker, who is well-renowned entity in the business space would say the aim of marketing, which is loosely referred to as product management in some cases, is to know and understand the customer so well that the product or service fits him and sells itself. So that's a pretty lofty goal, but at the end of the day, you really need to have that level of understanding. Back to what Chris said earlier, if you don't have that level of understanding, you're making assumptions. And if you make assumptions 1,000 times, what are the chances you get all 1,000 of those right? What we find is you need to be making sure that you're getting feedback early and often from your clients. We'll talk about that. But there's not always the opportunity to ask the direct question, how would you decide to implement this? Would you use option A, B, or C? In those cases, you need to be able to make an educated guess. Of course, it has to be validated over time, but that's based on your understanding, your intuitive understanding, which is based on this notion of empathy. So, in this way, what I would say is, you can't simply ask, what would you like me to build for you? If you're talking to your clients, you can't just simply walk up to them and say, hey, I want to build something, I have $10 million in budget, what should I build for you? You're not going to get a good answer. So to give you a very concrete example that I think we could all relate to, Henry Ford said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have told me they wanted a faster horse. You're never going to get to that innovation and that sort of leap in value, that transformative value, if you're simply asking people for what they want. You're, in that case, asking them to be the innovator and being lazy yourself. So it's important that you can build up this notion of empathy and intuitive understanding of your clients, but you're also sort of asking them, what are your problems? Repeat the question why. So if you talk to somebody and they say, I have a problem doing X, Y, Z, ask the question why. They'll give you an answer that probably relates to something that's specific to them. Ask why again. You'll eventually get down to a nugget that is something that can be expanded across a market of clients. Empathy maps are an important way of building up an intuitive understanding of a particular user and then representing that as a profile that can be shared across your team. This is something we use at IBM quite heavily. It's very important that you understand many different personas in your accounts. There's this notion of buyer users and this notion of buyer personas, and there's this notion of user personas. So the people that make the buy decision for your product and the people that actually use it on a day-to-day basis. And especially in B2B sales, that's often a different person. Procurement, some sort of a manager will make the purchasing decision, and us lowly peons get to actually use the products. And it's often the case that they'll have very different motivations and very different concerns that need to be considered. So you build up this map of empathy, looking at what they hear, what they see, what they feel, what they do, what they say, and what they think. And you'd be surprised getting 3 or 4 of us together talking about this notion. Will you actually build an empathy map together here in just a bit on this notion of Henry Ford's dilemma of how do I build a faster horse? Getting 3 to 4 people together with a pen, some sticky notes, and a whiteboard, you can build an empathy map that's surprisingly accurate in about 10 minutes. It's very impressive. It uses this notion of ideation. And we'll do that in a little bit to give you an example and, again, make this as concrete as possible for all of you. And my tip there is, as you do this, you want to use different colored sticky notes so you can see sort of positive and negative, and I'll show you exactly why that is as we go through this. So let's do this. We're going to go this notion of a traveler. So the user is a traveler in the 1910s era. So this is pre-automobile. Let's assume that they used horses then. I don't actually know if that was the case because I wasn't around then. And I mentioned I was computer engineering and MBA. Nowhere in there was a history background, so just give me this. Maybe the number's wrong. So they only have horses for transportation. So what would a person say, perhaps, in this space? And I'll actually give you the saying one just to get us going here. My horse is strong. Maybe that's something he would say to his friends at the bar when they're having drinks. I don't know. My rump is sore. He just rode for, let's say, 4 hours. He's thinking, man, my butt hurts. Someone else do the chores, like mucking stalls, grooming the horse, all these sorts of things. I don't want to go to your parents. It'll take too long. Perhaps talking to his wife or her husband. That may be actually that. So blue are positive and yellow are complaints. Perhaps that one should have been blue. It actually could be an excuse, but we can debate that one. So what might he be thinking and feeling in this case? Anyone want to venture a guess? Someone who has to ride on a horse. Not efficient. Excellent. I think that might be on here. What's that? Why do I have to feed this horse? It takes a lot of time. Anyone else? Uncomfortable. Good one. Oh, I'm sorry, I went the wrong direction. Sorry about that. But actually, so I forgot what order I did these in. So things that he does, let's go down that path. He obviously feeds the horse. He has to shovel horse poop. My wife's an equestrian, so I do a fair amount of this myself, so I can relate. I'm very empathic with this person. Grooms the horse. Those are all bad things. They're seen as negatives. They're negative sides of the experience of using a horse. Riding the horse, that can be fun. How many of you have paid to ride a horse? We all do it, it's fun. Pulls and tow stuff, pull a carriage, pull a plow, whatever. That's a positive experience with a horse. Perhaps riding with another person, though, is awkward. You want to go 2 people at a time over to grandma's house. Riding on a horse might not be the best way. Thinking and feeling. So how many of you have seen country westerns, right? My horse is my friend. They see their horse die, you think that their mom died. The horse is a symbol of toughness. They can see, like, they identify with their horse. You take their horse away, they feel like less of a person. Ouch. So that's a feeling, of course. We mentioned that his rump is sore, so probably has a feeling of pain. He's tired because he's riding for a long period of time on this horse. What's that?
Not easy to ride.
Not easy to ride, exactly. But he does feel that this is faster than walking, so he's grateful for the fact that, I have a horse and I don't have to walk. He wishes he had a second horse so he could tow more. He wants to pull a heavy load. This is a feeling he might have. Hearing, these are probably less relevant. So this is sort of an empathy map that I put together pretty quickly just to give you an example of what does this analysis look like. You want to identify with, what's going on in this person's head. So if you read this, you probably feel a little bit more connected to what this user is looking for and what some of their pain points are. Now, this is sort of in its raw form. The next thing you want to do is identify the pain points that are associated with these. So you kind of cluster them together. And this projector doesn't have the best differentiation between yellow and green, but you can probably tell. So I've clustered these together, and you look at some of the pain points, and I've identified 4. One of them is it's time consuming, it's a pain in the ass to ride a horse, to own a horse. You got to groom it, feed it, shovel its poop, do a bunch of chores, and it takes a long time to travel with a horse. It's uncomfortable and it's tiring, to your point earlier. This guy said his rump is sore. He said he feels ouch, he feels tired. It's not necessarily the most positive experience because of that. The horse is noisy. It has limited capacity in terms of how many people can ride on it and how much it can tow. So all of these are pain points that if Henry Ford is looking at his user, he could identify as ways to innovate on this experience. So now you got to look at this list of problems, and back to our earlier point, you got to identify problems that are urgent, shared by lots of people, and people are willing to spend money to solve. So we look at this list, and I think you can probably agree that the horse being noisy is not really a problem that people would probably pay to solve or is urgent. So we can kind of take that off of this list. But maybe the other 3 are important. So it's time consuming to use the horse, it's uncomfortable and it's tiring, and it has limited capacity. I think we would all agree that these are problems that, we have a little bit of an advantage given that we understand what happened over the last 110 years. But we, in this case, I think we all understand those are things that are urgent and people would pay to solve. So now you come up with, okay, given that these are our pain points we want to attack, what are some of the off-the-wall ideas, perhaps, of how we could solve these? And this is where true innovation comes in. You got to brainstorm, and you got to kind of get rid of some of your inhibitions. It gets a little crazy. So you'll see some of these ideas maybe a little bit ridiculous. The purple ones are these proposals for, let's say, how we could solve some of these pain points. So on the time-consuming and pain in the rear end side of things, maybe you could build a self-grooming horse. Again, viability is not necessarily something you worry about in the brainstorming phase. A horse that doesn't eat, perhaps a machine. Teleport. Child labor to do the grooming, the horse feeding, all that kind of stuff. A train that doesn't need tracks. Remember at this point in time in history, they did have trains. That's one way to go. And actually, to give you a little bit of insight, I think that's the way that he did go. On the uncomfortable and tiring piece, maybe padded pants would be one way to solve that problem. A softer saddle could solve that problem. Butt massage stations along your route could solve that problem. And on the horse's noise, you could have that barking collar thing that your dogs have to keep them from barking. So this is a way that you can sort of, again, progressing along this brainstorming path, how you can come up with ideas to solve these pain points that we've identified as being pervasive and urgent. Then the idea is, okay, we've come up with these ideas. Clearly, we're not going to be able to implement all of those. I don't know how many of us have an idea of how to teleport yet. So there's this notion of how you plot this on this axis of difficulty to deliver versus the value delivered if you actually solve the problem. Okay? And this is going to be one of the ways that we decide which of the ideas that we should pursue. So we start off with this notion in the lower left. So very little value delivered, but very low difficulty. So it's easy to build. This is sort of this utility class of offerings. There's not a whole lot of return, not a lot of bang for your buck, but it's something a lot of people could probably use. Then you have very high value delivery and very low difficulty to deliver. That's what we call a no-brainer. Obviously, you want to do those, right? I mean, why would you not? If it's easy to do and it delivers a lot of value. High value but high cost. That's what we call big bets. So these are the ones that you're not even sure you can necessarily deliver. But if you could, wow, this would be market leading, awesome stuff. And then low value, high cost. Stupid ideas, right? I mean, who would do that? So if you can group your ideas across this axis, it gives you a way to quickly analyze. And this exercise that I just took you through, you could complete this in probably an hour and a half to 2 hours. And you can apply this to very complex investment opportunities across your portfolio. We do this in IBM all the time for enterprise IT that people are paying millions of dollars to procure. It's equally applicable to this notion of horses versus cars. So the reason I've selected these examples for this particular audience is I have no idea what your I have no idea what all of your backgrounds are. So I wanted to pick something that could be easily understood by all of you. And I want to take you down this path that sort of gets concrete and gives you some tidbits that you can use either as product managers or in communication with your product managers. This is not an exact science. You have to have some notion of relative difficulty, relative value being delivered. But it's surprisingly easy to assess this pretty accurately. This will cause some colorful conversations in your teams. People will not necessarily agree as you go through this analysis. Some people will think this thing's really valuable. Some will say this is really valuable. Particularly when you involve your development, your R&D, they will have opinions on what's easy to build, what's not easy to build. Sometimes they're right. Generally speaking, you're probably going to pick 1 to 3 ideas out of this list. So you want to keep your work around for later use. It's going to be something that you can come back to later on and move down your priority list. So remembering what we came up with as sort of some of our ideas that we would pursue in purple here, let's look at what Henry Ford's wall might have looked like if he did this exercise. So I've plotted these ideas along these axes. English wasn't in my major list either. So I plotted these ideas, and you can sort of see how, just as an example, they might map. So very, sort of medium value delivered, very easy to deliver, padded pants and softer saddle. I mean, even in 1910, these could be delivered fairly easily. Those might be utilities or maybe no-brainers, depending on how much value we think we get. We could have a discussion or a focus group with our clients and say, generally, how much do you think you'd spend on this? Do sort of a double-blind price experiment, whatever you need to do. In the stupid ideas section, I put child labor, very low value delivered, and very difficult to deliver if there are any labor laws in place. So probably don't want to pursue that. A self-grooming horse, I'm going to go ahead. Biology is not on my list of majors, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that's not possible. Butt massage stations along the route, that was in there as an example of being absurd, but this is what you kind of got to get into. That's where some of the best innovations come from. Someone will run with an idea like that and say, well, maybe not that, but what if we did this other twist on it? Shock collar, again, that's probably a stupid idea. When you get into the big bets, that's where things like a horse that doesn't eat, a machine might be valuable. It might be something that could be high value and easy to deliver. A train that doesn't need tracks would be something that would be a big bet, something that delivers tremendous value but is also costly to deliver. Teleport would deliver even more value. I mean, the amount of time it takes to move with teleportation is obviously lower, but the difficulty to build that is higher. So what I've done is gone ahead and sort of selected the things I would invest in on this list if it were me. So the train that doesn't need tracks, the horse that doesn't need a machine, and maybe a softer saddle, and go with that. And so the rest of this sort of exercise, I'm going to focus on the train that doesn't need tracks as the one we take forward. Any questions so far? Complaints? Random thoughts? Withhold your yeah. All right, so one tip here. So we need to make sure we're alleviating pain points, but we're preserving the positive emotions. You'll remember before when we went through the empathy map that the horse rider identified with his horse in several ways that were positive. Things like, my horse is a sign of strength. My horse is my friend. These are things that would be sort of down to their core. If you've watched Western movies, you'd understand this. Saying that I'm going to take away your horse in favor of this machine might be regarded as, from a cowboy perspective, I'm less of a man now, so I'm going to fight this tooth and nail. There may be issues of attachment where someone is, like my wife, is very attached to her horse. I tell her she has an alternative, I'm going to be fighting an uphill battle. That's empathy of my wife, by the way, so another form of empathy. So you want to include both of these in your market messaging, so we'll talk a little bit about how we do that. So again, you're calling out some of the things that are relevant from a messaging perspective then. You're looking at the empathy map of this user that product management or design probably put together, and they can share this with the marketing team. So it's important for the marketing team to understand then what this user is thinking and feeling and doing and saying and hearing and all this kind of stuff, so that you can tailor your messages in a purposeful way. So if they're saying my horse is strong, someone's saying, hey, nice horse, dude, I saw it tied out back in the bar, it's really cool. My horse is my friend, horse is a symbol of toughness. These are things you want to leverage in your message design. So messaging the train without tracks with regard to these three areas. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir on this one because you guys are better at this than I am. But for example, the my horse is strong idea. Perhaps you could message that as, this is 45 times the strength of a normal horse. 45 horsepower is a very concise way to say that. So that may be one way that you combat that internal feeling that, hey, my horse is strong. Another one is, my horse is my friend, it's a symbol of toughness. What if you message that as, the train without tracks is a reliable product, it's built Ford tough, this is Henry Ford, right? Just like a good friendship. So you're sort of baking on or building on top of that feeling of, that positive feeling of tie to a friendship to the horse, and saying that you can transpose that to this new product we call the train without tracks. The other one is, nice horse, dude. Guys or ladies love it. Maybe it's one of those, sex sells types of things. You can say, just wait till he or she sees it. This will be something that helps you out in your personal life. But then there's also this notion of, what are the value propositions? Those are sort of the defensive messages that we just went through. This is the offensive messages. So what are the main value propositions you're getting across? So we're back on this pain point notion, right? We identified the pain points that were key, that we felt were urgent problems people would pay to solve, and were pervasive in the market. Those were, it's time consuming, it's a pain in the ass, it's uncomfortable and tiring to use, and it has limited capacity. So what if we were able to build messages around those pain points, explaining how our product alleviates those pain points in a targeted way? So it's low maintenance. The train without tracks doesn't need to be fed, groomed, and there's no more messy poop to clean up. That's a pretty compelling message people would pay to purchase. Get there faster. You can finish a day's ride in just 1 hour. If you're a horse user, this is something that's compelling to you. It's comfortable. Padded seats feel just like your living room couch. Imagine this being something that you hear as a user of a horse. And then higher capacity in towing. Pull with the power of 45 horses is a message that if you had a problem with limited capacity, you needed to tow things, needed to use plows in a field, might be useful. So that's a way that, sorry, is there a question? No. That's a way that you can tie in this notion of an empathy map into the process for developing, designing messaging for your product. Next thing is this notion of, okay, we've decided what problem we want to solve. How do we get to MVP as quickly as possible? The first thing to caution you on is you're not the judge of what MVP is. There's going to be a lot of debate in your development teams on when are we at MVP. The key thing here is that the market is the judge of when you're at MVP, not you. And we'll go through what I mean by that. The key here is you need to think big, but start small. You need to stage out delivery. The reason is you're trading off between a couple of opposing forces. One is the desire to get it perfect, and one is the desire to get it fast. And you've got to find this notion of what's the happy medium while delivering something that's useful in the market and something you can iterate on to get to your ultimate goal of utopia. Every phase of your product delivery should be desirable by a market, not just a single customer. And this is an important pitfall to avoid. A lot of times, especially in the B2B space, I mean, again, I'm an IBM, we get people in our development team that come in and say, I just talked to so-and-so company, Acme Bank, and they said if we have this feature, we'll get a $5 million sale. Well, a $5 million sale is not going to make my quarter. It may be true, and it may cost us 15 people worth of work for the next 3 years to deliver that feature. Is that worth the investment? Again, is it a problem that is pervasive in the market, people are willing to solve, and is urgent? In that case, perhaps not. So you got to make sure that every phase of your product delivery, not just version 3, but version 1, is something that's desirable by a market, not just a single customer. So that's one way that the market decides what is MVP. So as you look at options for staging, let's say we're focused on this train that doesn't need tracks innovation that Henry Ford was making. Option 1, you could start off version 1 being an engine. Option 2 is a partially completed car. And option 3 is this notion of a car. Where in this timeline could you actually sell something? 3, exactly. That's MVP. Now compare that to perhaps a different model. Start off with a bike. You move on to a higher capacity bike. And from there, move to the same version 3 of a car. All along the way, you're able to address a market and sell. And learn while you're in market, because all along this time you're engaging with a certain set of users. In this case, it's the same user progressing along different use cases. And you can glean understanding of that user's persona. You can enhance your profile, your empathy map, to understand more about what that user cares about and what its pain points are, and you can better address those. So it's important that as you design your staging, your roadmap, you're thinking about this notion of, when do I get to MVP and how do I stage this out? The other way that I've heard this described is this notion of if I want to be a wedding cake designer or wedding cake baker, I have 2 options of how to stage that. One is I could build the cake, just the actual cake batter baked in the oven. Then I could have a second version that adds some frosting in the middle. And the third one adds like the bride and groom on top with some other decorations on the outside. If you're serving the wedding cake market, only that third version is actually monetizable. Now what if instead you started off selling cupcakes? And then from there you grew into birthday cakes. And all along the way you're perfecting your recipe, you're understanding more about what people care about, the texture of the icing and what kind of flavors they want and all this other BS that I don't care about. And then finally you understand, okay, now I can build the more complex product, the wedding cake. And as you progress through there, you've made customer relationships, you've grown revenue, and you have a more viable business at the end of the day. So that's something I can't harp on enough. As you're designing how you solve these problems, the train that doesn't need tracks, you may not build a car in version 1. You may address that space by delivering a bike and learn from there. That's a bit of a contrived example, but hopefully I made the point. Next thing is get feedback early and often. I mentioned earlier that every product release, whether it's enterprise software, a train without tracks, a car, anything, is going to have thousands of decisions being made. Every developer makes probably 5 decisions a day at least. Your product management team makes a ton, the marketing team makes a ton. You can't get those all right if you're not basing them on some sort of facts. If you're just guessing, you're going to get these wrong. Feedback is the way that you ensure that you hit the mark. So how do you get this feedback? And how early can you get it? Well, my advice here is, and the approach I take is before you write the first line of code, before you write the first empathy map, any of that sort of stuff, start off with, obviously reading analyst papers and whatever you can get from the market, but then design surveys and take those out to some of your prospective clients. Say, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think about this? My first question is always very open-ended because I want to see if I can get some new insight that I'm not leading the witness. I ask a question of, what's your biggest pain point? If you had one silver bullet, what problem would you solve? I've gotten some of the best ideas for our products that way, just asking that question. But after that, I need to quickly get into something more concrete. And I go into this notion of, okay, we have the following hypothesis of what we think the market needs. What's your reaction to this? If I were selling you this today, what's your reaction? And you'll find out, apprehensions, you'll find out pushback that you would get early in the process before you've invested a single dollar in development. And that's, this notion of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's probably worth a ton of cure in this space. So getting these things ironed out early is important. You want to review your mission statements with them. So understanding, what you're trying to make a user be able to do to add value. So you want to explain that to them. Start off with paper prototypes. We do this exercise where we'll write down, if it's a mobile app, we'll actually write down on a screen and say, hey, how would you interact with this? Watch them push buttons on the paper and then say, okay, you push that one, here's the next screen, what would you do next? Sorry. Next thing is storyboards. Very, very valuable in communicating what the overall user experience is to a potential client. Taking them through sort of the equivalent of a comic strip. What we do here is we explain the different interactions of the people involved. In the example of the train without tracks or the car, it's probably fairly simple. You would have a picture of, someone gets up in the morning, has their coffee, walks outside, puts the key in the car, gets in, sits down, adjusts the seat, puts on the seat belt, puts the key in the ignition, starts it, adjusts the steering wheel and mirrors, all that kind of stuff. You can understand, you can convey to the user very clearly and very concretely what it's going to be like to use this product. Maybe they say, well, my wrist doesn't work, I can't turn a key. That may be a way for you to understand, if I develop this car with a key, I can't sell it. I need to have some other keyless entry thing so that this person can use it. Those are the kind of ways that you get very concrete on some of the experiences that your users will have, so you can identify pain points that haven't existed yet and fix those preemptively. Mock-ups. This is sort of the next progression. So as you're going along towards the GA or the release of your product, you want to look at, how do I get early views of what the product will look like with mock-ups? We get a lot of design feedback in this case. So what kind of things do we need to improve in our usability? Those are things you can get ironed out very early on. Early demos, so as you're getting closer to the running product, maybe it's a car that you can actually sit in, a simulator of some sort, and then a near finished product, you want to sort of give them the idea of what they can do with that. So you can get feedback all along this way and iteratively refine your product so that whenever you finally go to market, you've eliminated a lot of the assumptions that you would have made if you didn't have the opportunity to get this feedback. So that's absolutely critical to the process, is making sure that as you're developing a product, you're in the market, reviewing it with a set of clients. We like in our company to establish a set of formal relationships with a set of clients and keep going back to the same ones and show them, sort of what it is on day one and how it iterates over time to make sure you're getting continuous feedback. So I think I made this point, but just to reiterate because it's so important. Without feedback, you're operating on assumptions. And every time you make an assumption, you're increasing the probabilities from a simple math perspective that you're going to miss the mark with your product. And what that means is you have to wait another release in order to get it right. Just to give you a concrete example on this, in IBM we delivered a product that used Linux. How many of you know what Linux is? Awesome. Okay, you're an RTP. I figured most of you would. We used Linux. We started off with SUSE Linux, SLES, which has about 5% market share or so, less than 10. We took that around a lot of our clients, and what we found was nearly all of them were standardized on a competitor to SUSE, which is Red Hat. So at that point in time, we said, okay, well, our next release, we're going to get it right. We're going to deliver Red Hat Linux. We delivered Red Hat Linux support, went through the negotiations, got the OEM contract, all that kind of stuff done. Took us like 8 months. We delivered it. Then we found out, well, we like the Red Hat Linux, but we need to be able to customize it in this following way. Like, son of a bitch. So we got to start again, right? So we say, okay, we're going to spend the next 6 months delivering this capability to customize the Red Hat Linux instance, and you'll be able to use it. So we GA that product, and they come back again and say, okay, we can customize it, but we also want to be able to use this tool called Red Hat Satellite Server to be able to add, this notion of fixes as soon as they come out. It's like, does this ever end? Well, the answer is we didn't approach that product correctly. That was about 5 years ago, so I've learned from my mistakes. At that point in time, we were doing this iteration in market. It would have been much better if I had talked to that same person, like 4 different conversations, said, here's what I'm thinking, what do you think? And I've gotten that feedback very early on, and I would have avoided 2 years of product where I wasn't able to address that part of the market. So learn from my mistakes, and you can hit the arrow in the dot earlier. So now you're at the point where you have a vision for the product, and you then need to ensure that everyone on your team understands that vision. I'll give you another anecdote. In my product, we have the capability to manage software licenses. So we need to be able to give you a report that tells you how many software licenses you're using over your entire team, which is a lot harder than it seems. So if for example, everyone in this room was sharing a pool of licenses for, let's say, Windows, I don't know what Chris used last week, so I have no idea what the overall usage of our pool is. Well, we had this notion of being able to build a report that gave you, the list or the total quantity of licenses in use across all the products in your environment. So, Windows, Red Hat Linux, SUSE Linux, IBM products, third-party products, whatever it is. And the first implementation we got back from the development team, I asked, okay, so can you generate the report for the licenses and show me? They showed one number that said basically the sum of all licenses for all products across the entire team. There's no way to determine whether one product was over its license usage. There was no way to determine what individual teams were using. What happened was I communicated what I thought was clear to them and said, hey, I need to be able to create a license report. I made an assumption that they understood what that meant, and they delivered an implementation that was useless in the market. So you need to make sure that everyone on your team, down to a painstaking level of detail, understands the same vision. And this extends into not just development and product management, but sales and marketing as well. If you all know from a sales perspective, if you're out there in the field selling a set of value propositions that are overstated, you're setting yourself up for a client satisfaction issue down the road. So we can avoid that by making sure we're on the same page up front. From a marketing perspective, the same kind of thing, right? If you're able to communicate more accurately the capabilities that are being put in the product, we're going to have a higher hit rate in terms of conversions. So you want to avoid this. And this is an eye chart, so I'll read it. In the upper left, that is how the customer explained it. It is a swing with 3 rungs, or whatever you call that. The second one is how the project leader understood it. The third one is how the analyst designed it. The fourth one is how the programmer wrote it, wrapped around the tree. The fifth one is how the business consultant, or sales guy, described it. This couch in a chair or whatever. How it was documented on the left-hand side, the empty space. What the operations team installed. How the customer was billed, roller coaster. How it was supported. And then at the end, what the customer really needed. So this is, in a nutshell, as a product manager, my life. It drives me to drink. I should not be drinking water right now. So what you need to be able to do is make sure that all these stakeholders across the board understand very clearly what your vision is so that they can make sure that they're tailoring their day-to-day tasks around that. So keeping your team in sync, how do you do this? What are the key things you need to do in order to accomplish this? Focus on establishing commander's intent. You want to make sure that everyone understands what is the strategic goal. I mentioned earlier, everyone in the team is making autonomous decisions on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. They're making these by themselves without the commander in the room, whoever it is, the general manager, the director, the product manager, whoever that is, they're not always there looking over the shoulder. You need to get all the arrows on the team aligned, pushing the cart in the same direction. You need to be able to enable and empower your individuals to make these decisions that end up being aligned. My guidance on how to do this and what we do in our team is maintain a single document of truth. It takes discipline because this ends up being busy work after the fact to keep a document up to date, right? You got to have this notion of, we made a bunch of decisions in a meeting, now we got to go update the Bible, damn it. Or we made a bunch of decisions, or we implemented something, we changed it, we got to go update the Bible. It's a pain, but it's worth it. Because what that does is it solves the previous slide. It keeps everyone on the same page so that the marketing messages are on key, the sales team's saying the right things, the development team's building a license management solution that can actually be used, and we're hitting the mark. You want to hold regular working team meetings. So this is probably more for the project managers or product managers in the group. Focusing on sharing information versus status updates. It's not a notion of, did you do your work, did you do your work? It's not that kind of thing. It's a notion of, what did we learn since the last time we were together? Who met with a client? Who got feedback that either confirmed or corrected, our direction that we're taking the product in. These are all things that are important in keeping everyone in sync so that as things change in terms of what the vision for the product is, everyone's kept up to date. And then the fourth one is get the key stakeholders to join a few of your client discussions. So as you're getting feedback direct from the field, there's nothing like getting people to hear things straight from the horse's mouth to establish credibility. As a product manager in IBM, I have to deal with developers on a day-to-day basis, and very early on in our relationship, they're kind of feeling you out, and they're like, I don't know if I trust this guy. How do I know if I should be doing what he says? And at the end of the day, you got to establish credibility as quickly as possible, because otherwise, people are off doing their side pet projects, and they're not really, getting all the wood behind one arrow. One way to do that is get the key stakeholders together to either participate in a client discussion directly, if you're doing direct sales approaches, or take people through at least very frequently the data that you're using to make your decisions. And that's absolutely critical to gain buy-in across your organization. So in the space of SaaS, you're probably talking about usage metrics, A/B testing, whatever you might be using, digital marketing metrics, conversion rates, funnel, all that kind of stuff that gives you the decision criteria you're making your bets on. So I think we've talked a little bit about, or a lot about, sort of this notion of how you get to design or intend, or build out your intentions of what the product should be, and decide what areas to invest in, some tactics, a couple of different ways you can do brainstorming. I want to also talk a little bit about go-to-market strategy. Back to the point I made earlier, if a great product cannot be sold, does the product actually matter? It's a variant of if a tree falls in the forest, no one hears it, does it actually fall? Does it make a sound? Yeah. Literature is also not in my major list. So the key go-to-market components to consider in this space. Let's start with pricing. By the way, each of these topics I'm covering are probably fertile ground for an entire college course. So I'm intentionally taking a very high level pass at this. I'm happy to discuss in much more detail afterwards if anyone wants to drill into things, but I tend to see in these kind of mixed audiences, some people's eyes will roll in the back of the head, you get too deep. So I'm trying to stay at the right level of detail for this mixed audience. On pricing, there happens to be a very good book called The Strategy and Tactics of Pricing. It's one of the best business books I can recommend. I think it's valuable for anybody in the business world to read. It's actually used as a textbook in several business courses. And what that does is it explains very concretely what it means to deliver value and how you can capture that value with a price and what the strategy for setting price should look like. That's important from a sales perspective, from a marketing perspective, product management perspective. But in general in this space, you need to understand how you're competing in the price world. Are you competing on price or on functional differentiation? Competing on price is generally a commodity space. You don't want to be in that world. That's either a dead end or a dying or a dead end area. So generally only functional differentiation is sustainable in the market. The reason being, what is there to keep, let's say that Chris and I are competing on price on selling this laptop. I say I'll sell for $400, he'll go $399, $398. And this thing devolves until one of us hits our marginal cost of building this laptop. If he can build it for $295 and I can build it for $293, I'll sell for $294. He can't make a profit, I'll make $1. Well, I'd rather be able to sell the thing for $500 and make $206. So that's sort of you want to differentiate and compete on functional differentiation. But the key thing there is you need to be able to very clearly and persuasively articulate your differentiation in this space to be able to command a price premium. So if Chris is going to compete with everybody else making laptops getting down to $295, I want to be able to sell it for $500. I need to be able to explain why I can sell for $500. And talk to Apple if you want a lesson in how to do that. If you have a direct sales team, I'll say that there's a very different approach in terms of pricing. Everything you learn in business school around price sensitivity, which is this notion of if I increase the price of my dollar, I'm going to lose some amount of demand. Meaning, if everyone in this room is interested at the price of $30, if I go to $35, someone's going to drop off and say, I don't want it. Now, it may be worth it for me to do that. At some point, it won't be, but there's this notion of being able to compare the price versus demand, traditional demand curve. With a direct sales force, with all the incentives that are in place, it actually ends up being the exact opposite of what you learned in business school in a lot of cases. Think about this. It's because your direct sales force is usually operating on a quota, right? I think a couple sales folks here. Yeah. So you operate on a quota, and you're looking for the most efficient and the easiest and less risky way to achieve that quota in your quarter or whatever your measurement period is. The easiest way to do that, generally speaking, is to sell the big elephants in your portfolio. Now, I mean, that's assuming a lot of things like they're equal quality and equal penetration in the market and all that kind of stuff. But all things equal, correct me if I'm wrong, but a salesperson would rather sell, the $60,000 Escalade than the $15,000, whatever costs $15,000. I don't know. So that's the kind of thing in play here. You can play with your pricing strategy if you're using a direct sales force in different ways than if you were directly selling to your clients. You need to understand and influence their incentives and what level of focus you have what level of their focus you have. So for example, in the train without tracks thing, if you're selling B2B, selling fleets of vehicles, you're going to have a direct sales team involved there. So you might want to set up the incentives in a different way than if you're selling through a dealership. So you have a community and partner ecosystem that you want to use as part of your channel as well. So you need to make sure that you're creating incentive for all of them to participate in your market, right? You're creating a market around this product, especially in the area of Henry Ford and this, the automobile or the train without tracks. You want to make sure that you can grow beyond the scope or the scale of your own corporation. Think if Ford only sold with direct sales forces. They wouldn't have scaled anywhere near what they did over time. So what they did was they created this model of dealerships where everyone involved in this ecosystem had an incentive to sell their product. What does that lead to? More people selling the product, more penetration in the market, more revenue. So the car dealers in this case get a cut of the money. That's an important consideration as you're developing a product is how can you leverage more than just the scale of your direct sales force? Talk briefly about buyer journey. So if you're thinking about SaaS products, how many of you are dealing with online, digital, or SaaS products? Okay, cool. So this is a very different sort of buyer journey compared to what a directly sold offering would look like. So you've got to consider how your customer will discover your product, research your product, try and evaluate your product, purchase your product, use your product, and then provide feedback on it. So across these two types of offerings, for a SaaS offering, generally you want people to be able to be self-service, right? The margins are generally so thin on SaaS that you can't afford to pay the SG&A on a sales team. So what you need to be able to do is drive people in an automated way to your product, to become aware of it. AdWords, Facebook ads, these sorts of things are great ways to provide targeted advertising to a very captive audience. People then want to research your product. So they find out, they see a Facebook ad, like I saw this thing called Hexoskin that I got pretty excited about. How many of you know what Hexoskin is? All right, it's cool. So this is actually them triggering me to advertise to you. It was a very effective campaign. So this is it's a shirt that you wear when you work out, or I guess you could wear it when you don't work out, but it may not be as cool. And it measures certain biometrics like the capacity of your breathing, the VO2 max, your heart rate, your, like heart rhythm. There's actually an EKG built into this thing. And it communicates with your phone, and you can get data with this thing. And then you actually have APIs you can use to write applications that uses data. So lots of cool stuff you can do. In any case, my point is, I saw this as an ad on Facebook. I became aware of it. I discovered it. From there, I said, this is pretty cool. So I researched it. And what I did was I looked at as many reviews as I could find. I read blogs, read documentation, and I understood this sounds like a really cool product. I actually watched the videos, so trying and evaluating. It's a $450 product, so I couldn't just evaluate it by using it. But I watched videos, I looked at demos, these kinds of things on the internet. The purchase experience I couldn't try in this case, but I'm hoping that I get it for my birthday, which is tomorrow. We can take bets later on how many years or how many candles will be on my cake. Maybe do that number of shots. So then the next notion is how do you use the product? And using the product incorporates this notion of how do I gain more information and get more use out of the product? So documentation, user groups, forums. And then I provide my feedback, which enriches the experience for the next person, which is providing reviews. This is sort of the cycle you need to think about and making sure you're optimizing for in the SaaS space or the, let's say, self-service space. I wouldn't say that the Hexoskin shirt would be SaaS. It's not software as a service, but it's a self-service product. For direct sales offerings, B2B sales, anywhere you have people involved, the experience is a little different. Obviously, you have a person involved in the discovery process where they're sort of force-feeding people, right? And you have this notion of, I have to arm my salespeople with the ammunition they need to communicate to their clients. So I have to provide, as a product manager, the sales collateral, the videos, the canned demos that they need to be able to be persuasive with their clients around my product. As far as enabling people to research my product, okay, one of my sellers comes in and pitches to an audience like this. Some number of you will become interested and you'll want to go off and research more about my product. What that'll generally mean is you'll be looking for references. Who can I talk to that's used this so far? Documentation, blogs, find out what people are saying about my product. They want to try it. Let's say that pass muster with the references and all that kind of stuff. They want to try it out, so they can use live demos. My salesperson could go on site and provide a demo, or we can get them in a beta. Then they have to purchase the product, so sales contracts and deal structures. I won't get into the details of this, but it's things you have to worry about. Using the product is very similar. You have documentation and user groups, and then providing feedback is in the form of references. So there's very different buyer journeys between sort of, let's say, self-service products and force-fed, direct sales-led products. And as a product manager or business owner, you have to make sure that you understand this and sort of are designing it in a purposeful way. So now that you have customers, the title of this presentation wasn't just launching a product, but also getting to profits. And I only have a couple more slides left here. Now that you have customers, you need to understand how to get the most out of your customer base. And what does that mean? Well, they purchased the product once, but you want them to come back and buy more. You want them to be references. And the best way to do that is to make sure that your clients are successful using your product and they're happy. So they'll purchase more of it, be referenced to help you gain other clients. And then also, as you're making your clients happy, you'll establish a relationship, which, if you remember earlier on in the process, as we're designing this product, we required quite a bit of feedback all along the way. So this becomes a cycle, a feedback loop. And it's important that you don't have any sort of gaps in that feedback loop, or else your iteration capability, delivering the next version of your roadmap, takes a hit. So it's important you keep your clients happy so that you can go back to them next time and say, hey, I'm thinking of adding this feature. Or hey, what if I reduce the weight of the iPad by this many ounces? Or what if I added the capability to do copy and paste on the iPad, which is an early limitation? These are the things that you can do if you keep people happy. So you can help you refine your empathic understanding of your clients and your users, and it gets you more high quality requirements to put into your product and improvement. So there's nothing like an active user to give you and put you through your paces as a product manager or a product ownership team. Baseball can't be that exciting, I'm sorry. It gets you high quality requirements that you can use in improving your product. The key thing here that I think a lot of people forget about is you can't forget about the clients that you missed. Until you're the market leader, there's obviously more people that aren't using your product than are. So you can learn a lot about that if your goal is to ultimately grow your product into the spaces you're not in today. Talking to the people that bought your product is not going to help you understand the people that didn't buy your product. So there's a very concerted effort you need to make to get out in the market and talk to clients who said no. Now this is actually so from a tactical perspective, it's a tough thing to do, because what happens is they think you're trying to follow up and sell them more. You need to disarm them. So in these conversations, you got to approach them and say, listen, if I wanted to sell you something, I couldn't do it if my life depended on it. I make no quota. I have no capability or desire to sell you something. I just want to find out feedback. I'll buy you lunch. I'll buy you drinks. I'll bribe you. Whatever you need me to do, just talk to me for 30 minutes and we're good. Generally, that works. Sometimes they'll think you're creepy, but just go to the next one in that case. Win-loss analysis is another great way to get this kind of feedback and understanding of the clients that you missed. So you understand what were the gaps that caused them to choose your competitors. What did they do better that were urgent problems they were willing to solve that you didn't deliver solutions for? Why did they have a more compelling solution than you? These are absolutely critical ways to get insight so that you can improve your product and improve your performance. And as I said, this is arguably more important than talking to clients who purchased, because you kind of already have them on the hook. You need to learn about the ones you don't. So as I said, this is a very sort of high-level cursory view of what it looks like to design a product from the get-go, some of the tactics you would use. There are quite a bit of very more in-depth programs you can use to learn more about this. I'm making a plug for this just because I use this program. I require my team at IBM to use this program. I'm not in any way compensated for it. They don't even know I'm saying this. In fact, I had to steal this off of Google Images, so hopefully there's no copyright thing on it. In any case, this is a view of the pragmatic marketing framework. This is sort of a comprehensive view of what they believe are the critical things that you need to worry about in delivering a business and managing a business. And you'll see that there are many different ways or many different categories. You have the market, you have things like the focus in terms of the product itself, the business in terms of the profitability, pricing, all that kind of stuff. There's planning, there's programs, readiness, support. All of your sales channels are factored into here, your client relationships, your product support. All of these things are in there. These are all areas I haven't touched on and I have no intention to touch on in this audience. We can go deeper if you want to talk about it over beers after this. But if there's something you want to learn more about, and I can't answer it after this presentation, this is something you may want to consider. Pragmatic marketing is something I would recommend to anyone, at least in a product management space, but it's probably valuable for others as well. So what makes a good product manager? Let me ask, again, how many are product managers in this audience? 2? So we can have this as a one-on-two conversation if no one else cares about this. Does anybody have aspirations of getting into product management? Okay, so why don't we have a little round table after this? We can talk about it. That may make more sense. So, questions? Anyone have any questions about anything I said? Anything you would have liked me to touch on that I did not touch on that I probably could talk about at least?
What's been your biggest problem dealing with marketing?
What's been my biggest problem dealing with marketing? I think there's 2 problems we deal with most frequently. One is, in certain areas of the business, whether or not you have a dedicated marketing team as opposed to sharing one with multiple products. So it's getting attention to the product team or the marketing team that can tend to be a difficult task. Another one is funding. There's always these very, if we were going to use that graph that I showed, the big bets versus the no-brainers, a lot of the marketing things we'd like to do are big bets, and getting the funding to do that is difficult. So that's always been a challenge as well. We're seeing more and more of a push toward digital marketing in our business, so that's something that scales down to even like very low effort things up to very high. It's just a matter of how much money you want to pump into it for things like paid ads and these kinds of things. So we're seeing a lot of those challenges go away with this move to digital marketing. But the other thing is, in our portfolio we have a lot of very diverse products. And you could choose one of 2 things. You can either make a very high-level message across all of them, or you can do very product-specific marketing across each product. And one's prohibitively expensive and probably would inundate people to a point where they lose interest in your market messaging anyway. If you're marketing 400 products, it just becomes fire hose, right? So what we tend to do is market at a higher level, and that becomes difficult from a product management perspective to feel that I'm getting the value propositions of my product across in the overall message.
Can you go back about 4 slides to your go-to-market slide?
Animations.
There.
Sure.
So it seems to me that is how to push your product to the market. The other approach is how to get the market to pull your product from you. That's either a case of like pain or pleasure. How much pleasure is going to solve, or how much pleasure is going to give you, or how much pain is going to take away. It seems to me that Apple does a really good job. Some other companies do a really good job of positioning rather than a go-to-market strategy. And how can the market suck the product from me? Kind of a different approach.
So I'll repeat for the camera. The comment was about sort of this notion of go-to-market versus market coming to you, I guess. More of a client pull versus a seller push model. And this notion that Apple does a very good job of engaging the buyer to want more. I mean, to your point, they get people to wait in line outside in the rain for a product that they can buy a commodity elsewhere. So it's very compelling what they've accomplished. It's why they're the most valuable company in the world, actually. I think I would differentiate between business to business and business to consumer. Business to business, doesn't like that word. Business to business and business to consumer. When you're doing business to business, you're generally going to have a direct sales force, and they expect, they bring vendors in all the time, and you have these discussions. From a business to consumer perspective, I think you're absolutely right. You simply can't afford to touch every client. There's too many of them. So in that case, you need to create go-to-market strategies, which it's still go-to-market. You're taking a product to market. But that go-to-market strategy is more about self-service. So I think more of the SaaS online offering kind of strategy would apply here, where you will enable people to discover your product, probably through some sort of a marketing campaign, perhaps on TV or radio or whatever it is, web advertising like I described with Hexoskin, and then enable them to learn more about the product, become engaged with the product, and then ultimately make a purchase decision. So I think you made a very valid point that there is a difference between sort of a direct sales-led approach to go to market and this notion of a mass market, business to consumer on a mass market scale strategy to go to market. If you had a client who was looking for a good product manager or product marketing manager. So, okay, how would you identify that? I think the things you want to look for in a good product manager are sort of the following. One is you need somebody who understands the space, because again, empathy is absolutely critical. Empathy itself is a characteristic I would look for in a product manager, making sure that they can identify with the user, sort of learn something about them, but then be able to extrapolate beyond that and have a higher hit rate than the average person in terms of the assumptions they'll make, so that whenever they go back and validate those assumptions, they're wrong on less of them. Because even catching an error early on in the product lifecycle is costly. It's just not as costly as later on. So empathy is one thing. Knowledge of the space is another thing, but that can be learned. My personal strategy is draft talent. You can teach people if they have talent. So I think empathy is the one you can't really coach. Communication, ability to relate with people, speaking ability. Not that I have the best necessarily. I've stumbled over myself a couple times, but in my defense, I was on a flight back from Charlotte that night, and I got my Tyrannosaurus Rex arms out and was finishing this on the flight, so didn't coach. So in my defense, I might have put a couple of these charts together pretty late. But in any case, speaking capability, ability to relate with people, and the ability to understand and talk to various different types of personalities and personas is absolutely critical. Finally, the last thing I'll add on that is the ability to simplify a message. So if you can get a very complex message down to just a very simple set of bullet points, something that can be digested, something that can be either a marketing message or a communication internally on what the team needs to build, those are all sort of drawn from this notion of being able to simplify an otherwise complex message. Distill down from an uncertain, a set of uncertainty and a very large amount of unstructured data, and glean from that a strategy that you can get people to buy into is a very hard task, and you need somebody that can simplify a message to do that. So we can still have that round table, even though I think I just said everything I know about the subject. Go ahead.
I'm also a B2B tech sales, and I'm seeing a couple of different things that are really trends. Large IT vendors are going more and more to the business partner communities of sales, and SaaS is becoming more and more of a product to be sold.
Right.
How do resellers that are selling SaaS products ensure that they are receiving the references that are needed? But a lot of the pre-sales and all the things that go around selling that product remains with them.
So how do they get some of the references you said?
Right. So I'll give you an example. That's 360 product that I sell. All of those things that need to be done on the sales side, basically all I do is kick in the door, and their sales engineers go ahead and do a demo and make sure everything is done, and then we go ahead and the product on our paper itself. How do I get that?
Got it. So the question was basically a lot of enterprise IT vendors, especially as the example was stated, are using business partners. They're getting out of the direct sales channel in one of two ways. They are using business partners, and they're also going toward the SaaS approach, where people are going to the SaaS space. So his question was, as a business partner, which he says he is, how can he ensure that he's getting things like the references that are required to make the next sale? I guess a couple ways. One is, if you're keeping a continuous touch with the client, you'll understand sort of as the deal progresses what's happening, and you can maintain a relationship. If truly all you're doing is kicking the door in and you're handing it off, you're doing opportunity identification, not opportunity ownership, you're not going to be able to follow through. I mean, that's just, you don't have the touch point to do that, unless you can negotiate with your vendor in that case and say, hey, listen, I'm able to drive more deals for you if you give me insight into your references database, so make it a win-win. That's just a negotiation at that point.
Thanks.
Sure.
So I'm just curious, based on the framework that you described, how would you change that if you're working as a startup or you don't necessarily have the resources to develop?
So the question was, how would you change that framework? How would I change the framework if I were working in a startup versus in a big company? The answer is, I really wouldn't. And the reason for that, I think, is I've actually worked in a startup in IBM. I mentioned like one of my things early on is I'm sort of in corporate entrepreneurship. I've actually started products from scratch twice. The only difference is I had a big bank account behind us that we could tap into. But trust me, they guard that pretty heavily. So I didn't necessarily feel like I had unlimited funds. So I think, and in fact, if you go out and look at some of the design thinking that's out there on the market, some of the things that some of Silicon Valley uses as their approach to design, they use exactly this process. You'll see them talk about empathy maps. You'll hear about as-is and to-be scenarios. You'll hear about all these sorts of artifacts that I took you through as examples. They use the exact same approach. It's tried and true. It gets to concreteness. It eliminates assumptions, and it delivers good products. So the only real difference, I think, is in startups, you may have more revolutionary ideas than evolutionary ideas in a startup versus sort of an iterative product set. And in that case, you can't rely as much as early on your clients understanding what they need. Meaning, hopefully this example with Henry Ford translating an audience who are used to horses into this train without tracks, which hopefully you've identified as the Model T Ford. That was sort of a transformative innovation where he was dealing with an audience that didn't understand what he was delivering. But he was able to communicate that in a way that tied into their pain points. And I think even in that case, this approach would work pretty well. So I'm convincing myself as I stand here that, yes, I would use this framework pretty much unchanged. Anyone disagree with that? I encourage dissent. No, okay. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, that's it. Thank you.